Tejo had been living off scraps for as long as he could remember. Not food scraps, though sometimes that too, but the scraps of a galaxy that had no real place for humans. He was a salvager, which was a polite way of saying he bought other people's garbage and tried to sell it for a little more than he paid. It was not a proud life, but it was his, and he had learned to stop apologizing for it a long time ago. The auction house on Guillaume 7 smelled like burnt metal and old oil. It was a rotating orbital station, built from the welded-together husks of dead freighters, and everything about it felt temporary. The lights buzzed, the floor shook when the recyclers kicked on 2 levels below. Salvagers, mechanics, and low-level traders filled the rows of plastic seats, most of them alien. Tejo was one of maybe 5 humans on the whole station. That was normal. Humans were everywhere in the galaxy, but they were never really important anywhere. The auctioneer was a tall creature with 4 arms and a voice like gravel dragged across glass. He moved through the lots quickly. A crate of expired medical gel, a pallet of cracked hull plates, a box of navigation chips from a ship model that had been out of production for 40 years. The bids were low, the enthusiasm even lower. Tejo sat near the back, watching, waiting for something that felt right. He did not have a system. He had instinct, and his instinct was wrong about half the time, but that was still better than most people here. Then Lot 2207 came up. The container was pushed onto the platform by a small cargo drone that struggled under its weight. It was about 2 meters tall and 3 meters wide, made of a dark metal that Tejo did not recognize. Deep scratch marks ran along its sides, not the kind made by rough handling or bad storage, but the kind that looked like something had tried very hard to get in, or get out. The surface had a strange shimmer to it, like oil on water, and when the drone bumped it into position, Tejo thought he saw the metal ripple for just a second. The auctioneer read from his screen. Lot 2207, contents unknown, origin unverified, recovered from drift salvage in Sector 44, no hazardous material flags. Starting bid, 200 credits. Nobody moved. 150 credits. Silence. 100 credits. Come on, people. It is a full-size container. The metal alone is worth something. Still nothing. The alien bidders stared at the container with the kind of careful blankness that Tejo had learned to read over the years. They were not just uninterested. They were uncomfortable. Something about that container made them want to look away. Anyone? Tejo leaned forward. His brain told him to stay quiet. His gut told him something else. 30 credits, he said. The auctioneer looked at him like he had just offered to buy the station itself. Then he shrugged. 30 credits to the human in row 12. Sold. That was how it started. He hauled the container back to his rented cargo bay using a borrowed grav lift that pulled to the left and made a screaming noise every time it turned. By the time he got it through the bay doors, he was sweating through his jacket and cursing himself for spending money he did not really have. Yuna was already there, sitting on top of a disassembled engine block, eating noodles from a foil packet. She was small, sharp-eyed, and had hands that could take apart a fusion reactor blindfolded. She had served in the United Earth Defense Fleet for 6 years, before deciding she preferred fixing things to blowing them up. Now she worked freelance out of the same station as Tejo, and the two of them had an easy friendship built on shared bad luck and a mutual understanding that the galaxy owed them nothing. "What is that?" she asked, looking at the container. "Lot 2207. Contents unknown." "How much?" 30 credits. Yuna put down her noodles. "You spent 30 credits on a mystery box. I have a feeling about it." "Your feelings have cost you money before. This time is different. You say that every time." He did say that every time. But this time, something really was different. When he had placed his hand on the container to steady it during transport, He had felt something. A hum. Not a vibration from the gravlift or the station's systems. Something that came from inside the container itself. Something faint and warm and almost alive. They spent the next hour trying to open it. The container had no visible seams, no latches, no control panel. Yuna tried cutting tools, magnetic clamps, even an old plasma torch she kept for emergencies. Nothing worked. The metal absorbed everything they threw at it. "This is not normal metal," Yuna said, running a scanner over the surface. "I am not even getting a clear reading. The molecular structure keeps shifting." Taeho pressed both hands flat against the surface. The hum returned, stronger this time. The metal grew warm under his palms. And then, without any sound or warning, a seam appeared, running from top to bottom, and the container split open like a shell. Inside was not what either of them expected. There were no weapons, no cargo, no contraband. Instead, the container held a single object, mounted on a pedestal of dark crystal. It looked like a navigation console, but it was unlike any console Taeho had ever seen. The screen was not a screen at all, but a flat piece of something that looked like glass and stone at the same time, threaded with veins of soft blue light. The base of the console was fused into the crystal pedestal, and the crystal itself seemed to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Taeho reached out and touched it. The console exploded with light. Not dangerous light, but a sudden bloom of blue and white that filled the entire cargo bay. Holographic projections burst from the surface, filling the air around them with star maps, charts, and symbols in a language that Taeho had never seen. The maps showed regions of space that did not match anything on the standard galactic charts. Stars he did not recognize. Systems that should not exist. And at the center of it all, a single point of light that pulsed brighter than everything else, like a beacon calling out across the dark. Yuna stood frozen, noodles forgotten. "What did you just do?" Before he could answer, a line of text appeared in the air in front of him, glowing softly in that same unknown language. The symbols were beautiful and strange, curving and looping in patterns that felt almost familiar, like a word on the tip of his tongue. And then every light on Geomoon 7 went out. The entire orbital station, all 6 rings, all 40 levels, every system from life support to the auction house, went dark for exactly 3 seconds. When the lights came back on, alarms were already screaming. Emergency channels flooded with confused voices. Station control demanded to know what had happened. In his cargo bay, Taeho stood in the glow of the alien console, his hand still resting on its surface, his heart beating in time with the crystal below. He did not know what he had found. He did not know what that line of text said. But he knew, with a certainty that went deeper than instinct, that this was not junk. This was something the galaxy had forgotten, and it had been waiting for him. The blackout on Geomoon 7 lasted only 3 seconds, but the panic lasted much longer. Station security swept every level, looking for the source of the disruption. They checked the power grid, the reactor housing, the communication relays. They found nothing. Every system had shut down at the exact same moment and restarted on its own, as if the entire station had taken one long breath and then exhaled. Taeho kept his mouth shut and his cargo bay locked. For 3 days, he and Yuna studied the console. It stayed active, projecting its strange star maps in a slow, rotating display that filled the cargo bay with blue light. The crystal pedestal hummed constantly now, a low, steady tone that Taeho could feel in his teeth. Yuna ran every scan she had, every tool in her kit, and came back with the same answer every time. "I do not know what this is made of," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor, with her scanner in her lap. "It is not a mineral. It is closer to living tissue that has been frozen in a solid state. And the console itself has no wiring, no circuits, no chips. The light patterns are running through those veins like blood through a body. This thing was not built, Tejo. It was grown. Tejo stared at the maps floating in the air above them. He had tried touching different symbols, different stars, and each time the display shifted, showing new regions, new systems, new paths through space he had never heard of. But the text remained unreadable. Whatever language the console used, it was not in any translation database they could access. "We need someone who can read this," he said. "We need someone we can trust," Yuna corrected. "If the wrong people find out about this, we are dead. Or worse, we are irrelevant and the tech disappears into some government vault." Tejo knew she was right. But he also knew they could not sit on this forever. So, he called Dakyun. Dakyun was the kind of man who knew everyone, and owed loyalty to no one. He was thin, always smiling, and dressed better than anyone on Gyomun 7 had any right to. He dealt in information the way other people dealt in cargo. Need to know which dock inspector could be bribed? Dakyun. Need to find a part that was not supposed to exist anymore? Dakyun. Need to disappear for a while? Also Dakyun, though that service cost extra. He came to the cargo bay, looked at the console, and for the first time in all the years Tejo had known him, stopped smiling. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "Auction. Lot 2207. "For how much?" 30 credits. Dakyun closed his eyes and let out a long breath. "You bought this for 30 credits. This thing that is projecting star charts I have never seen in 20 years of moving information through this sector. 30 credits. Do you know someone who can read the language?" Dakyun opened his eyes. The smile came back, but it was thinner now. "I know one person. She is brilliant, and she is a little bit crazy, which in my experience are always the same thing. Her name is Sujin." Sujin arrived 2 days later, on a transport shuttle that looked like it had survived at least 3 collisions. She was young, younger than Tejo expected, with short hair and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many late nights and not enough meals. She carried a single bag, stuffed with datapads and loose notes. She had been a xenolinguist at one of the most respected alien academic institutions in the galaxy, until she published a paper arguing that all known galactic languages shared a common root, a precursor language from a civilization that existed before any of the current species evolved. The academic community called her theory absurd. The aliens on the review board called it insulting. She was removed from her position and had spent the last 2 years working alone, ignored by everyone except Dakyun, who collected interesting people the way others collected debts. She stepped into the cargo bay, saw the console, and stopped walking. She stared at the floating text for a long time without speaking. Then she sat down on the floor, opened her bag, pulled out a datapad, and began to work. She did not speak for 6 hours. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red and her hands were shaking. "This is real," she said. "This language. I have spent 2 years building a theoretical model of what a precursor language would look like. Root structures, grammatical patterns, phonetic foundations. This matches. Not partially, not approximately, exactly. This is the language of the architects." The word hit the room like a dropped weight. Every species in the galaxy had some version of the myth. An ancient civilization, older than stars, that had shaped the galaxy and then vanished. Most scientists treated the stories the way they treated ghost tales, amusing, but meaningless. Sujin had staked her entire career on the idea that the stories were real, and it had cost her everything. "What does the text say?" Tejo asked. Sujin looked at her notes. "The console is not just a map. It is a key. It points to a location, a place described as a garden of knowing, a repository. The architects left something there, something meant to be found." "By who?" Sujin hesitated. "That is the part that worries me. The text references a specific genetic signature, a species designed to interface with this technology." She looked directly at Tejo. It responded to your touch because it was built for human DNA. The silence in the cargo bay was total. The architects did not just seed life in the galaxy, Sujin continued slowly. They created humanity, specifically, intentionally, for a purpose. Taeho felt the floor shift under him, not physically, but in every other way that mattered. He was a salvager. He bought junk for 30 credits. He was nobody. But this console, this ancient impossible thing, had opened for him and him alone. Not for the alien bidders at the auction, not for the powerful species that ran the galaxy. For a human. Before anyone could say another word, the cargo bay door exploded inward. 3 armed figures stepped through the smoke. They wore the black and gold markings of the Gumho Pact, a trade syndicate that controlled half the black market in this sector. They were not here to negotiate. "We will take the device," the lead figure said. "You can walk away or you can be carried away. Choose now." Taeho looked at Yuna. Yuna already had her hand on a plasma wrench, which was not a weapon, but could absolutely be used as one. Sujin clutched her datapads to her chest. Dokyun, who had been leaning against the wall, had already vanished through a side vent. Classic Dokyun. "Yuna," Taeho said quietly, "how fast can you get the Bada running?" "It is already running. I never turn it off. Wastes fuel, but saves lives." Taeho grabbed the console. It detached from the crystal pedestal with a sound like a sigh, as if it had been waiting for him to pick it up. The crystal crumbled to dust the moment the console left it. The Pact enforcers raised their weapons. Taeho ran. Yuna threw the plasma wrench at the lead enforcer's head, buying them 2 seconds, and then she was running too, pulling Sujin behind her. They tore through the station corridors, past confused workers and screaming alarms, until they reached Docking Bay 9, where the Bada sat waiting, ugly and reliable, and already humming with power. They were through the airlock and launching before the Pact enforcers reached the bay. Yuna pushed the engines hard, and Diomun 7 shrank behind them, becoming just another point of light in the dark. In the cargo hold of the Bada, Taeho held the console in his hands. It was warm. It was glowing. And deep inside its crystalline veins, new text was appearing. Text that Sujin would spend the next several days translating. Text that would change everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the galaxy. The architects had not just made humans. They had made them for a reason. And that reason was still waiting, somewhere in the unmapped dark, in a place no living being had visited in 1,000,000 years. The Bada was never meant to be beautiful. It was a cargo hauler that Yuna had bought from a decommission yard 6 years ago and rebuilt piece by piece with salvaged parts and stubborn patience. The hull was mismatched metal. The cockpit smelled like engine coolant, no matter how many times she cleaned it. The navigation system sometimes froze when making sharp turns. But the engines were strong. The shields worked, and it had never once failed to get them where they needed to go. Yuna loved that ship, the way other people love their families, and she would fight anyone who said a word against it. They had been in open space for 4 days now, running dark, with minimal systems to avoid detection. Sujin had barely left the small table in the cargo hold where she worked, surrounded by datapads and empty drink packets, translating the console's text line by line. Taeho checked on her every few hours. Each time she looked more exhausted and more amazed. "The architects saw the future," she told him on the 4th night, her voice rough from too little sleep. "Not exactly, not in detail, but in patterns. They understood that the galaxy would follow a cycle. Species would rise, expand, compete, and destroy each other. Over and over, forever. War after war after war. They wanted to break the cycle. How? By creating a bridge, a species that could connect to every other species, that could adapt and communicate, and empathize in ways that other intelligent life could not. They designed humans to be that bridge. Our biology, our neural structure, even our emotional range, it was all engineered. Not to make us the strongest or the smartest, but to make us the most capable of understanding others. Taeho sat with that for a long time. It was a heavy thing to carry, the idea that his entire species had been built for a purpose they never knew about. "And this garden of knowing," he said, "what is it?" "Everything the architects ever learned, all of their science, their medicine, their history, stored in a place that only a human can fully access. The console is the key to finding it. The coordinates point to the Goma expanse." Yuna, who had been listening from the cockpit doorway, made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a groan. The Goma expanse, of course, the one place in the galaxy that everyone with any sense avoids. The Goma expanse was a region of dead space, roughly the size of a small galaxy arm. No trade routes passed through it. No colonies existed within it. Ships that entered often did not come back, and the ones that did reported sensor failures, navigation errors, and a constant feeling of being watched. Every species had legends about the expanse. None of them were pleasant. "The architects hid it there on purpose," Sujin said. "The interference is not natural. It is a defense system. It keeps everyone out." "Everyone except us," Taeho said. "Everyone except you," Sujin corrected. "The console will guide us through. It was designed to." They changed course for the Goma expanse. It would take 6 days at maximum speed. They had enough fuel if they cut life support to minimum levels, and ate nothing but emergency rations, which tasted like cardboard wrapped in disappointment. Nobody complained. They all understood that what they were doing was bigger than comfort. On the second day of the new course, Yuna picked up a signal on the long-range scanner. A ship was following them. Military-grade engines, advanced sensor array, Galactic Union identification codes. It was not a patrol vessel. It was a pursuit ship. "Officer Hanuel," Yuna read from the intercepted signal data. "Career military. Assigned to something called the Quiet Bureau, which I have never heard of, which probably means it is the kind of thing we do not want to hear about." Taeho frowned. "The Union is tracking us? Why?" Sujin answered without looking up from her translations. "Because the Union already knows about the architects. They have known for a long time, and they do not want anyone else to find out." She explained what she had pieced together from the console's data. The ruling species of the Galactic Union, the oldest and most powerful alien civilizations, had discovered fragments of architect technology centuries ago. They studied it in secret. They learned enough to understand what the architects had intended for humanity, and they buried it. Every fragment, every artifact, every piece of evidence was classified, hidden, or destroyed. The idea that humans, the youngest and least respected species in the galaxy, had been chosen as inheritors of the most advanced civilization in history, was a threat to every power structure in existence. "If this gets out," Sujin said, "every alien government that has spent centuries treating humans as second-class citizens has to answer a very uncomfortable question. They are not afraid of what we will do with the technology. They are afraid of what it means." On the 5th day, the Gumho Pact found them. The warship dropped out of faster-than-light travel less than 1,000 kilometers ahead of them, a massive thing bristling with weapons and armored in layers of reinforced plating. It was 10 times the size of the Bada. The communication channel crackled to life with a simple message. "Surrender the device. Power down your engines. This is your only warning." Yuna's hands moved across the controls. "I can outrun most things in this ship, but not that. Not in open space." Taeho looked at the console sitting in the cargo hold, glowing softly, patiently, as if it had all the time in the universe. He thought about Sujin's words. The console was designed for humans. It responded to human DNA. It had opened for him. It had powered down an entire station at his touch. "Yuna," he said, "can you connect the console to the ship's main systems?" She stared at him. "That is insane. We do not even know what it will do. It was built for us. It will not hurt us." "You do not know that. I know it the same way I knew to bid on lot 2207. I cannot explain it, but I know." Yuna looked at him for a long moment. Then she grabbed a handful of interface cables from a storage bin and went to work. She was fast. She was always fast when things were about to go very wrong. The moment the console connected to the Bada's core systems, everything changed. The lights went out and came back in a different color, a deep, steady blue. The engine noise shifted from a mechanical roar to something smoother, something that sounded almost like music. Teiho watched in shock as the console's crystalline veins extended outward through the cables, spreading through the ship like roots through soil. The hull monitors showed the exterior plating reshaping itself, thickening, hardening, forming patterns that matched the markings on the original container. The shield generator, a basic civilian model that could stop small debris and not much else, surged with power readings that Yuna said were impossible. The Bada was transforming, not into a weapon of war, but into something else entirely, something that was beyond anything the galaxy had ever built. The packed warship fired, a full volley of plasma charges, enough to destroy a small moon. The Bada's new shields absorbed every shot without a flicker. Then, the ship responded, not with weapons, but with a pulse. A wave of energy that washed over the warship and simply turned it off. Every system, every weapon, every engine, all of it shut down in an instant. The warship drifted, dark and silent, its crew alive, but completely helpless. From her pursuit ship, still a safe distance behind, Officer Hannell watched the entire thing happen. Her instruments recorded everything. A civilian cargo hauler had just disabled a packed warship without firing a single shot, using technology that should not exist. She sat in her chair for a very long time, staring at her screens, and for the first time in her career, questioned everything she had been told about humans. The Bada continued on its course, and on the 6th day, they arrived. The nebula was vast and dark, a cloud of gas and dust that hid everything within it from outside observation. The console guided them through, navigating paths that no sensor could detect, until the cloud parted and they saw it. A station. No, that word was too small. A structure, hanging in the darkness, larger than any moon Teiho had ever seen. It was ancient and impossible and beautiful, covered in the same crystalline patterns as the console, glowing faintly with light that had been burning for millions of years. The console pulsed once, brightly, and every display on the Bada showed the same message, now translated by Sujin into words they could all understand. Welcome home. Teiho stood at the cockpit window, looking out at something that should not exist, feeling something he had never felt before in his entire life. He felt like he belonged. The docking bay opened for them without being asked. A section of the station's surface simply parted, revealing a passage lit by soft blue light that pulsed in the same rhythm as the console, as if the entire structure was breathing. Yuna guided the Bada inside with careful hands and a nervous silence. The passage closed behind them, and for a moment, everything was dark and still. Then the lights returned, and they found themselves in a chamber so large that the far walls disappeared into shadow. They stepped out of the ship slowly. The air was clean, warmer than expected, and carried a faint scent that Teiho could not name, something between rain and pine and old stone. The floor beneath their boots was smooth crystal, veined with the same living light that ran through the console. Everywhere Teiho looked, the station felt less like a machine and more like a place that had grown from something alive. Sujin was the first to speak. This station is maintaining its own atmosphere. After millions of years, the power source must be beyond anything we can imagine. They walked. The console guided them, projecting a path of light on the floor that wound deeper into the station, through corridors wide enough for ships to fly through. The walls were covered in patterns, not decorations but data, information stored in physical form, written into the structure itself, like words carved into bone. Sujin ran her fingers along the walls as they passed, and whispered translations under her breath. Fragments of history from a civilization that had existed before any of them had a name. After an hour of walking, they reached it. The Garden of Knowing was not what any of them had imagined. It was a chamber at the heart of the station, a sphere so vast that it had its own gravity, its own light, its own weather. The ceiling, if it could be called that, glowed with a warm golden radiance. The floor was covered in crystal formations that rose from the ground like trees in a forest, each one different, each one pulsing with streams of light that flowed through their transparent bodies like rivers. The light carried data. Taeho could feel it, a pressure behind his eyes, a tickle at the base of his skull, as if the room was trying to speak to him through his skin. At the center of the garden stood a single pedestal, identical to the one that had held the console in the original container. It was waiting. Taeho placed the console onto the pedestal. It clicked into place with a sound like a key turning in a lock, and the garden woke up. Every crystal in the chamber blazed with light. The streams of data became rivers, then floods, then oceans of information pouring through the air in visible waves. Holographic displays materialized everywhere, showing schematics, equations, biological diagrams, star maps, architectural blueprints, and texts in the architect language that scrolled so fast they blurred. The room was alive with the collected knowledge of a species that had existed for longer than most stars. Sujin fell to her knees, overwhelmed. "This is everything," she whispered. "Everything they ever knew, everything they ever were." "How do we access it?" Yuna asked, her voice small in the enormity of the chamber. Taeho knew. He did not know how he knew, but the knowledge was there, placed gently in his mind, like a hand on his shoulder. He walked to the pedestal, placed both hands on the console, and closed his eyes. The information hit him like a wave, not painfully, but completely, filling every corner of his awareness with things he had never learned and could suddenly understand. Energy systems that drew power from the fabric of space itself, limitless and clean. Medical technology that could repair any cell, cure any disease, reverse any damage. Terraforming methods that could turn dead rocks into living worlds in a single generation. Communication networks that operated outside of normal space, allowing instant contact between any 2 points in the galaxy. And beneath it all, running through everything like a foundation beneath a city, was the story of the architects themselves. They had lived for billions of years. They had watched species rise and fall, build empires, and tear them apart. They had tried to intervene directly, and failed. They had tried to stay hidden and failed at that too. In the end, they realized that no amount of power or knowledge could save the galaxy from itself. What was needed was not a ruler or a guardian, but a translator. A species that could sit between all others and help them see each other clearly. So they made humans, not as servants, not as soldiers, not as gods, as bridges. And then the architects left, not because they died, not because they were forced out, but because they understood that their presence would always cast a shadow. As long as they existed, younger species would look to them for answers, instead of finding their own. So they departed, leaving behind the garden and the key, trusting that one day a human would find it. Taeho opened his eyes. Tears were running down his face, and he did not bother to wipe them. He understood now. He understood everything. We need to share this, he said. All of it. With everyone. But the galaxy had other plans. Haenel's voice came through on an open communication channel. She had followed them into the nebula, watched them enter the station, and had been sitting in her ship outside, wrestling with her duty and her conscience. Now she was calling to warn them. Tejo, the Union knows where you are. The Quiet Bureau tracked my ship. A battle fleet is on its way. 12 capital ships, full combat deployment. They will be here in 6 hours. Yuna swore. Sujin looked up from the crystal tree she had been studying, her face pale. Why? Tejo asked, though he already knew the answer. Because the ruling council will not let this knowledge reach humanity, or anyone else. The power balance of the galaxy depends on keeping species in their place. If everyone gets architect technology, the old empires lose everything. Their military advantage, their economic control, their political authority. All of it, gone. And you? Tejo asked. You are Union military. You were sent to stop us. There was a long pause. When Haenel spoke again, her voice was different, quieter, more honest than anything she had said through a military channel before. I have spent my entire career being told that humans are a minor species, that we are tolerated because we are useful, but that we will never matter the way the older species do. I believed it. I built my life on believing it. And then I watched your cargo ship disable a warship without firing a weapon, using technology that responds to human DNA built by the oldest civilization in the history of the galaxy, specifically for us. Another pause. I am docking with the station. I am coming inside, and I am done following orders that exist to keep us small. She arrived 20 minutes later, still in her uniform, sidearm on her hip, looking like a woman who had just burned every bridge she had ever built and was still deciding how she felt about the fire. She walked into the garden, looked around at the blazing crystal forest, and the rivers of light, and the endless cascading knowledge of a dead civilization, and said nothing for a very long time. Then she turned to Tejo. The fleet will arrive in less than 6 hours. This station has defensive systems. I saw the power readings. You could destroy every ship they send. I know, Tejo said. So what are you going to do? Tejo looked at the garden around him, at the knowledge of the architects, given freely, left behind not as a weapon, but as a gift. He thought about the cycle Sujin had described, species rising and falling, and destroying each other, over and over, because they could not see past their own fear. He thought about what it would mean if the first thing humanity did with this gift was use it to kill. I am going to do something else, he said. Haenel stared at him. The fleet will not negotiate. They will open fire the moment they arrive. Then I need to move fast. He turned back to the console and placed his hands on it again. The garden responded, and this time he asked it a question. Is there another way? The answer came immediately, glowing in the air before him, in letters that all 4 of them could read. There has always been another way. You only needed to choose it. The fleet arrived early. 11 capital ships and 1 command carrier dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the nebula. Their formation tight and professional, their weapons already charged. They represented 4 of the 5 ruling species of the Galactic Union, each one ancient, each one powerful, and each one deeply terrified of what was happening inside the station they had spent centuries pretending did not exist. Haenel stood at the station's external sensor display, watching the fleet spread into an attack pattern. She had commanded ships like those. She had trained under officers who now sat in those bridges, ready to give the order to fire. She knew exactly how much damage they could do. 20 minutes, she said. Maybe less. Once they confirm the station's location, they will begin bombardment. Yuna was already at the station's defense systems, which had come alive the moment the fleet was detected. The readings were staggering. The station had weapons that could crack planets, shields that could swallow stars, and power reserves that made the entire Union fleet look like toys. Yuna's fingers hovered over the controls, not touching them, but clearly wanting to. "One shot," she said quietly. "I could end this with one shot. They would never even see it coming." "No," Tejo said. He was standing at the console in the center of the garden, his hands flat on its surface, his eyes closed. He had been connected to the station's systems for the last 2 hours, learning, searching, asking questions that no human had ever been in a position to ask. The architects had left him everything, every answer, every tool, every weapon, and he was going to use none of them. "They have spent 1,000 years calling us the youngest, the weakest, the least important species in the galaxy," he said, opening his eyes. 1,000 years telling us to sit down, stay quiet, be grateful for whatever scraps they let us have. And now we are standing in the middle of the most powerful place in the universe, and we have a choice. He looked at Yuna, then at Haniel, then at Sujin, who was sitting among the crystal trees with her data pads, recording everything she could. "If the first thing we do with this power is destroy a fleet, we prove every bad thing they ever said about us. We prove that we are just like everyone else. Just another species that fights when it is afraid. I will not do that. I will not let that be the story." Haniel stepped forward. "Then what? They will fire on this station. The shields may hold, but for how long? What is your plan?" Tejo smiled. It was not a confident smile or a heroic smile. It was the smile of a man who was very scared and very certain at the same time. "You told me the architects built a communication system that could reach every inhabited world simultaneously. Is it still functional?" Sujin looked up from her datapads. "It is more than functional. It has been waiting. The system is connected to a network of relay points hidden across the galaxy, buried in asteroids, moons, and deep space structures. They have been dormant for millions of years, but the moment you activate the array, they will all come online. Every world, every station, every ship, every device capable of receiving a signal, every screen, every speaker, every data terminal in the galaxy, all at once." Tejo took a breath. "Then that is what we do. We do not fight them. We do not hide the knowledge. We give it away, all of it, to everyone." Yuna pulled her hands away from the defense controls. "All of it? Every species? Even the ones who sent that fleet to kill us? The architects did not build this for humanity alone. They built humanity to carry it. But the knowledge belongs to everyone. Cures for diseases that have been killing alien populations for centuries. Energy solutions for systems that are running out of power. Food production techniques for worlds that are starving. If we keep this for ourselves, we are no different from the Union Council that tried to bury it." The station shook. The fleet had begun firing. Long-range bombardment. Testing the shields. Probing for weaknesses. The station's shields held without effort. But the message was clear. Time was running out. Tejo closed his eyes and connected to the console one last time. He felt the station respond to him. Vast and patient and warm, like a parent watching a child take its first steps. He reached for the communication array, and the station guided him to it, showing him how it worked, showing him how to open the door that the architects had built millions of years ago and had been waiting all this time for someone to walk through. He activated the array. Across the galaxy, on every world and station and ship, screens flickered, speakers hummed. Data terminals that had been idle for years suddenly lit up. A signal cut through every frequency, every channel, every firewall, not aggressively, but gently, like a knock on a door. And then the knowledge began to flow. Medical data streamed to hospital worlds where plagues had been burning for decades with no cure in sight. Within minutes, doctors on a dozen alien planets were reading treatment protocols that worked, that were simple, that could have saved millions of lives if they hadn't been available even a year earlier. Energy blueprints reached mining colonies that were on the edge of collapse, systems where the fuel had run out, and the people were slowly freezing in the dark. The blueprints described generators that pulled energy from the structure of space itself, that could power a planet forever, that could be built with materials available on almost any world. Agricultural techniques appeared on screens in famine regions, simple methods for growing food in any soil, any atmosphere, any gravity. Terraforming guides arrived on colony ships that had been struggling for generations to make their new homes livable. Communication protocols opened channels between species that had not spoken to each other in centuries. Everything, all of it, free for everyone. On the bridges of the Union fleet, alarms screamed as the signal bypassed every security system they had. Officers watched in confusion as their own personal devices began displaying architect data. The command carrier's captain received a message from his home world within minutes. His government was already accessing the medical database. His daughter's school had received the agricultural data. His brother's colony had just downloaded the energy blueprints. The captain looked at his weapons officer. The weapons officer looked back. Neither of them gave the order to fire again. One by one, the ships in the fleet went quiet. Not because they were defeated, not because they were afraid, but because their own people, on their own worlds, were already using the knowledge, and no amount of military force could put it back in the box. The bombardment stopped. In the Garden of Knowing, Tejo opened his eyes. The crystal trees blazed with light around him, brighter than they had been in millions of years, alive with the joy of finally fulfilling their purpose. Yuna was staring at the sensor display, watching the fleet power down its weapons. Sujin was crying quietly, her datapads clutched to her chest. Henel stood straight-backed and still, her uniform suddenly feeling like it belonged to someone she used to be. The communication channel crackled. A voice came through, the captain of the command carrier, sounding like a man who had just watched the ground shift beneath his feet. Station. This is the Union fleet. We are standing down. There was a pause, long and heavy. We have received your transmission. Our governments are requesting that we do not engage. We are returning to our respective territories. The channel went silent. Nobody in the garden spoke for a long time. It was Yuna who broke the silence first. So what happens now? Tejo stepped away from the console. His legs were weak, his head was pounding, and he was hungrier than he had ever been in his life. He looked around at the garden, at the crystal trees and the rivers of light, and the ancient knowledge that was now flowing across the galaxy like water breaking through a dam. Now it gets messy, he said. Old governments are going to fall. New ones are going to rise. People are going to argue about who controls what. Some species will adapt quickly, and some will fight the change. It will take years, maybe decades before things settle. But it cannot be undone. The knowledge is out. It belongs to everyone now. And us? Sujin asked. What do we do? Tejo shrugged. We go back to work. Hanul raised an eyebrow. You just changed the course of galactic history and you want to go back to work? I am a salvager. It is what I do. The galaxy does not need a hero sitting on a throne. It needs people who show up, do the work, and help where they can. That has always been enough. They left the station 3 days later, after Sujin had copied as much data as her storage devices could hold, and Hanul had sent a very long resignation letter to her commanding officers. The station sealed itself behind them, still glowing, still breathing, still waiting. It would be there when it was needed again. The journey back took a week. The galaxy they returned to was already different. News feeds were chaotic. Governments were scrambling. Scientists on 100 worlds were publishing papers based on architect data that rewrote entire fields overnight. It was messy and loud and frightening and wonderful, exactly as Tejo had predicted. 3 months later, Tejo was sitting in a new auction house on a different station somewhere in the Mid-Rim territories. He had a cup of bad coffee in one hand and a bidding paddle in the other. Yuna sat next to him, her boots up on the seat in front of her, scrolling through engine part listings on her datapad. The auctioneer brought out a new lot. A battered cargo crate, origin unknown, contents unverified. Starting bid, 50 credits. Nobody moved. 30 credits? Tejo raised his paddle. Yuna groaned. Not again. He grinned at her, the same grin he had worn the day he bought Lot 2207, the grin of a man who knew that the galaxy was full of things waiting to be found by someone stubborn enough to look. You never know what you will find, he said. And somewhere out in the dark, between the stars, in a station older than memory, a crystal tree pulsed with light, once, gently, as if it was laughing.